Hi, thank you so much for coming to listen to my pre-recorded talk for the General Online Research Conference in 2020. My name is Lydia. I am a project executive on the international politics team here at YouGov, and I'm here today to talk about data quality, specifically in the context of data collection during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm going to be talking specifically about the YouGov COVID-19 monitor that we ran from February up until the end of August. I was specifically in charge of operations for the public and the consumer monitor that we ran within this product. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how operations affects data quality and some really good practical ways to structure your monitor, both in the field, in the survey design and the team organization, to circumvent some of the data quality issues that we came across when running this project. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what the COVID-19 monitor actually is, the countries that it runs in, the structure of it, the kind of topics that it covers, so you have a good background on what I'm talking about. And then I'm going to talk about data quality in terms of three different aspects: accuracy, reliability, and relevancy, which I'll define later on in the presentation. And I'm also going to touch a little bit on narratives drawn from cross-linguistic studies and internet penetration issues. So the COVID-19 monitor covers four major regions, which is Europe, APAC, MENA, which is Middle East and North Africa, and the Americas from Canada down to Mexico. It's broken up into three different products, which is the public monitor, the health monitor, and the consumer monitor, which each have their own different aims. The public monitor looks mostly at the public's opinion around the COVID-19 pandemic, especially when it comes to how the government have dealt with the pandemic, support for different government measures, fears and worries, and so on. And the aim of this product is basically to put as much data out there to the public for free, and all of the results are available for free on our website. We also have the health monitor, which is looking at compliance tracking and how different people are responding to different health measures when it comes to coronavirus. So wearing face masks, washing your hands, avoiding crowded areas, and so on. Again, all of this data is also for free, not on our website, but through GitHub. And we have a few academics who are using it to better inform what they're doing during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we finally have the consumer monitor, which is the only paid-for part of the entire COVID-19 monitor, which is looking at consumer behaviour and economic recovery data. I specifically ran operations for the public monitor and the consumer monitor, so I'm going to talk about them in the context of this presentation. But if you have any questions about the health monitor, please just reach out and let me know. I can find information for you. Speaking a little bit on the actual methodology of the monitor, we were running in 26 different countries across 21 languages. Our samples ran between 1,000 to 2,000 per country. And that was run at a cadence of weekly reporting. So we would field the survey every week and then we would deliver data every week. And again, this ran from February 2020 up until the end of August 2020 across nationally representative samples in each country. The COVID-19 monitor reports across four bands, which is the international, regional, country, and demographic. So when we talk about international, very successfully compare Europe against the Americas when looking at COVID-19 data. We can also take that down to looking at regions as a collective. So if you want to talk about Europe in isolation, we cover enough countries within Europe to be able to do that. We can also look at the data for a specific country in isolation, and we can also go deeper within those countries to certain demographic groups. So we can break the data up by age, gender, or region. So first I'm going to talk about data quality in terms of accuracy. And when I talk about accuracy, I'm talking about how can we confidently say that the data that we're reporting is representative of the groups that we're talking about. And the monitor does this in two different ways. The first is that when it comes to large-scale reporting, the monitor covers such a large swathe of countries that we're able to talk confidently about regions in isolation, and we're able to confidently compare regions. If we just picked, North America, the UK, and Germany, we couldn't confidently compare the Americas compared to Europe because we just haven't sampled enough within that region to accurately represent the views of that collective. Whereas the monitor runs 10 countries in Europe and covers Canada all the way down to Mexico. So we cover those areas very well. And when it comes down to small-scale reporting, where we're talking about countries in isolation or groups within that country, YouGov employs an international array of panels, which allows us to much better control for the demographics that are taking our survey. And using a sampling frame that comes from the census from each individual country, we can control who's taking our survey and make sure that the right proportion of a demographic cell is included in that data. This is in sort of contrast to methods that use Twitter, for example, to sample their surveys, which has a much higher, younger demographic. And you're much more likely to get younger demographics taking your survey, and you just have to hope that older demographics will see the survey via snowball methods. So the two ways that the monitor really stays accurate and keeps that data quality high is by one, using a vast array of countries across the regions that you're trying to talk about. And two is that we use methods that can better control the demographics that are taking our surveys, and employ methods such as weighting to make sure that the proportion of responses is in line with the proportion of demographic cells within a society or nation. There's two considerations that come hand in hand with this. The first is that, especially for the pandemic, we are a little bit constrained by internet penetration rates. Here you can see China only has a 58.4% internet penetration rate, and India is down at 40.9%. This is something especially I think we need to consider for COVID-19, because when an infection hits a rural area, which is less likely to have internet penetration, they're actually much less able to deal with an outbreak. They're much less likely to have healthcare infrastructure, healthcare personnel, and healthcare resources. The same goes for older demographics, who are much less likely to be covered by internet and have internet-ready devices. They are also much more at risk for the effects that come with COVID-19. So when you're talking about your data quality in terms of accuracy, and is it accurately reflecting this nationally representative group, internet penetration rates are not something you can control as a market research company, but it is something to really keep in mind when you're running research in these areas. The other thing that I just want to touch on really lightly is when you're talking about narratives from cross-linguistic surveys. If you speak any other language, you will know that English is not directly translatable, and two different languages behave and have very different philosophies behind them. So it's not really possible to ask exactly the same question in each individual language, of which we were asking them across 21. So when you are drawing a narrative together that is reporting on a large scale, such as international or regional, you just have to keep in mind that the question will be interpreted differently in different languages. The example I have here is English and Japanese, and it's asking about whether people are worried that children's education will suffer as a result of the pandemic. In English, we will use the term my children. In Japanese, we will use the word kodomo. And the connotations of kodomo are much younger than my children would be in the UK, which is something to keep in mind. A really good point that we found with the COVID-19 monitor is that when you send your surveys for translation, also include text which explains the context of the question, so you can better keep the meaning of a question as it goes through different languages. The next point that I want to make about data quality is data quality in terms of reliability, and that is all about knowing that large changes in data are reflecting reality and aren't just signaling either human or systematic errors in the system processes that you have for your surveys. So this is what we call block 1, which was the survey running from February to May. And the survey started in Asia when COVID-19 was very much confined to that area. But then as it spread around the world and turned into a pandemic, the questionnaire that grew up in Asia was then passed on to these different hubs around the world. And governance over each individual questionnaire was kept within different teams. This is fine when you want to run surveys that only look at countries in isolation. But when you want to look at data that is regional or international, the reliability of that data in terms of data quality is a factor of how well you can control the systems that your survey is running in, so that when you do see large-scale changes, you can trust that it's not a result of systematic or human error. So what we did was, for Block 2, which was starting in May 2020, we decided to centralize the whole process, which is a little bit in contrast to how I think a lot of these large projects are run. And what we did was we gathered the questionnaires which had been localized in each hub. We gathered all the different client interests that we knew that were involved with designing this process. We looked at their methodology requirements and their panel requirements. And then we standardized everything. So it was one questionnaire that came out with a central team that went out to hubs. It was one single design of process by which the surveys were fielded, processed and reported. That wasn't just down to each hub to do it individually. It was the central team that ran the majority of the processing here, which then also allowed us to automate most of it as well, and we took on governance over the whole project as well, which meant we were much faster when dealing with systematic errors if they ever came up. And here is the optimal structure of how it looks now. So the central team is control of all the topics that happened on the questionnaire. It's in control of all the methodology that the survey runs on. It's in control of how the data is delivered to each client. So it's all standardized across the board. What's important here is that the best structure that we found for running this project is a central team, but with local input. Reliability and data quality can be broken up into two considerations, which one we've already discussed, is knowing that your data is being processed in systems that are reliable and consistent and don't throw up errors that look like changes in data, which is what centralizing it does. But the other part of it is also including these checks from local teams. So when we started to see fears about perception of the pandemic on a national basis in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, for example, we were able to reach out to the teams in those areas and check that this was in line with how the situation was out there. And they were able to confirm, yes, cases are spiking, people are worried, this is in line with actual perceptions within the area. And I think that is a really key point of this whole presentation, is that keeping your data reliable is about controlling the process as much as you can with as small as a team as you can, and reducing replication as much as you can, but also making sure that you have those connections to the local regions in which you're running this survey, so you have that human check against the data that you're reporting. The last point I want to make about data quality is data relevancy. So as we know, the pandemic changes every week. Lockdowns come in and out of play, new cases can surge, legislation can come in quite rapidly. So your cadence of fieldwork and reporting needs to match the cadence of the pandemic. Otherwise, while your data might be accurate and you can rely on its results, the situation might already be out of date by the time you report it. So relevancy is the final step of data quality here, and is a product of accuracy, reliability, and technology. I pick up on technology because it was also a lot of the automation processes that we put into play that with the monitor that took the pressure off of our human teams and allowed us to report data much, much more quickly than we could otherwise. Specifically, we automated the process of sending the survey out to respondents, closing the survey when it reached the desired sample size, running weighting checks to make sure we had a good representative sample, then automatically sharing that checked data with clients through our reporting tool, Crunch. And the result is that, I personally moved from working 10 hours a day on this monitor, just, maintaining the quality and the volume of the data that was coming out each day, to 3 hours a week, without sacrificing on data that was shared. And really, it's that key piece of technology, of automation that allowed our teams at YouGov to use its existing systems and teams to produce this really accurate and reliable data, but now at the scale of the pandemic, and at the speed of the pandemic. And what it allows us to do is to do results comparison like you see on screen here. So we're looking at the data from our World in Data, which is just showing cases in Sweden between the dates of May the 7th to June 30th. And you can see here that there was quite a significant rise in cases over that time period. And the monitor is able to give us similar cadence of data, but around government handling approval in Sweden along the same time period. And you can see here that the changes in government handling approval aren't as dramatic as we might have expected from a country that was under such international scrutiny and had taken such a different response to the pandemic, and saw such a large rise in cases compared to its other Nordic neighbours. And we can do this for any of the 26 countries that the monitor covers. And that's only possible because we are using methods that covers enough country with the monitor, uses a method of sampling that allows us to get demographically representative samples within a team structure that allows us to rely on these systems to produce good data and to trust that data when it tells us some really crazy statistics. And also to be able to produce data at such the volume and the scale that we need to be able to cover the pandemic across an international scale. And that is really the crux of the point about data quality during collection during the COVID-19 pandemic, is that specifically when you're creating a product which is looking at the pandemic, there are some sort of key considerations here about the pandemic that will affect the design of the survey that you're running and the decisions that you make around governing it and pushing out that data to the public. That was an incredibly quick tour of the YouGov COVID-19 monitor and how data quality becomes a consideration when collecting data about the pandemic and people's responses to the pandemic. I'm here for the Q&A, so if you do have any questions, please just pass it to me then. Otherwise, my email is on screen, so if you do have any questions, just throw them across to me. I would be happy to answer them, and if I can't, I can find someone else who can. Thank you so much for letting me have this space at the General Online Research Conference, and I look forward to answering any questions.